Welcome to our Beginning End of the Bomb Talk Story series. My name is José Barzola from the Matsunaga Institute for Peace at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Our talk story today will focus on equal lives, Hiroshima Hibakusha Shigeaki Mori, and the stories of 12 American POWs with director G.K. Hunter. Thank you for joining us today to learn about resiliency during unprecedented times. J.K. Hunter is director of Sakura Pearls, Healing from World War II, a documentary about Japanese survivors of the atomic bomb meeting the American survivors of Pearl Harbor. This remarkable and intense exchange between former enemies is meant to spark dialogue among the future generations about how we can resolve conflict without repeating the painful experiences of our ancestors. An electric speaker and passionate singer, G.K. Hunter has presented at such venues as the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, Cornell University, and NPR, and All Things Considered on KU and M Radio. Today, director G.K. Hunter, or Kamana, shares the central theme of reconciliation featured in the documentary Sakura Pearls, Healing from World War II. This theme was inspired by his interview of Shigeaki Mori-san, a Hiroshima Hibakusha atomic bomb survivor, a renowned historian in Japan who documented 12 American POWs that perished in the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. And to get us started, I'm going to turn it over to our special guest, Kamana Hunter. Mana, are you there?
Let me know when it's ready. It's not changed yet.
Good to go.
I am. I'm right here. Can you see me?
Definitely. Thank you so much for being with us.
Aloha, everyone. I'm G.K. Hunter. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jose, and to the Matsunaga Institute. Aloha, everyone, and Nippon de Ohayo gozaimasu. And in the mainland, good evening. So thank you, everyone, for coming through. I also see that we have some people here from Costa Rica. I appreciate you being here. And I would like to first thank the Matsunaga Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution at UH Manoa. Again, this institute is very near and dear to my heart. They helped me complete my documentary called Sakura and Pearls, Healing from World War II. What that's about is we had Japanese atomic bomb survivors, also known as Hibakusha, who came here to the Pearl Harbor Visitor Center to meet American Pearl Harbor survivors. So this documentary is about an hour long, and it chronicles the meeting between former enemies who became friends. And a lot of the people from the Matsunaga Institute, including Maya Sotoro, Professor Brian Hallett, as well as Jose Barzola, the educational specialist, were featured guests in the documentary. So first of all, a big mahalo nui loa to Matsunaga Institute. Today, I would like to be talking to you about one of the Hibakusha, one of the atomic bomb survivors that I had the honor to interview during Sakura and Pearls, Healing from World War II. His name is Shigeaki Mori-san. And Mori-san survived the atomic bomb when he was only 8 years old. Not only that, but he was invited as a very special guest to the Hiroshima Memorial service in 2016, which was a meeting between Japanese Premier Abe-san with then President Obama. And they went there to commemorate, for the first time, two sitting leaders to commemorate those who had perished both in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They also went to Pearl Harbor later in the year to pay their respects to the fallen American servicemen who died in the Pearl Harbor attack. It was a big meeting of reconciliation. It is also the spirit in which my film was made, and it is the spirit in which Shigeaki Mori-san has lived his life, both as a Hiroshima atomic bomb survivor, but also as a historian. Now, one of the things that I would really like to impress upon you about Shigeaki Mori-san is how he became a historian and how being an atomic bomb survivor, a Hibakusha, actually really inspired the work that he was doing. He had met with 12 American families of POWs that had died from the atomic bomb. Now, these people were not known of, and many of them were kept a secret for many, many years. However, Shigeaki Mori-san really felt that it wasn't about whether someone was a Japanese life or an American life. He really saw it as a human life. He really saw that even though that Americans were the enemy during World War II and Japanese were the enemy of Americans, he valued those lives equally. I had the pleasure of meeting Mori-san in his home in Hiroshima. Now, at the time that I had met him, he had just been on the front pages of all the newspapers worldwide, in New York, Los Angeles, Japan, everywhere in the world. There was this photo of a crying atomic bomb survivor in President Obama's arms, President Obama hugging him at this Hiroshima special memorial service. And after that, he just became like world known overnight. He became very famous in Japan in particular. So the fact that I was even invited to his home is a very honoring and humbling experience for me. And my Japanese is not that good. So I went with a translator, and she, Natsumi Yamazaki-san, was also very helpful in this process. He told us about how when he was 8 years old, how he survived the atomic bomb. He lived not too far from his school. And on that day, he was walking towards his school, and he happened to be on a bridge that went over a river. Now, when an atomic bomb explodes, it explodes above the land, okay? And then after it explodes above, there's a place on the ground that's known as the epicenter. The epicenter is the center of the explosion. And so here it is, the bomb, it explodes, and it comes down into a mushroom cloud, and it goes up into a mushroom cloud, and it just kind of rises up in both directions. And then there is a shock wave that comes out, and a flash of light, a shock wave, and heat. That's the three things that happen when the radiation explodes. So here is Mori-san, 8 years old, crossing over a bridge. There's a flash in the sky, and the next thing he knows is he has been knocked by the shock wave off the bridge and into a river. He's lucky that he got knocked into the river, because as the wave of heat and radiation passed over him, he was submerged in the water, which kept his skin cool. So he was not burned from head to toe like so many other survivors of the atomic bombs had been. And he got himself out of the water, but he had still been exposed to all this radiation. And he remembers his shirt hurting his skin, so he took his shirt off. And the black rain came down. That's the rain that happens after an atomic bomb. It takes all the ash and soot from the bomb and brings it back down. And that rain is actually poisonous because it has radiation in it. So he remembers all of these things, and finally he made it to his school. And there was a shelter that they had there just for bombs, because bombing during World War II was very frequently. This was the first time an atomic bomb had ever been used, but it was meant for regular bombs, non-nuclear bombs. But he went in that shelter, and he stayed there for a day, and he was hungry and cold and shivering, and he didn't know what had happened. Nobody did. Nobody had ever seen anything like this before. Well, in the schoolyard, as he made it there, he remembered seeing many, many bodies, thousands of bodies, in fact. And this is a question that I get asked a lot in the Q&As whenever I give a talk about Sakura Pearls or about the atomic bomb. How many people actually perished? And most of the official numbers in Hiroshima or about 140,000 people that died from the atomic bomb. But I need to explain a little bit more. Going back to that epicenter, when the bomb comes down and explodes, there's people within a few kilometer radius that die instantly because the radiation is so strong and the heat, it just melts everything in its path. So the people that are closest to the epicenter, unless they have some kind of shelter or something protecting them, they die instantly. But I want you to think of another circle around that, several kilometers out. And when they're out here, the blast itself is not enough to kill you instantly, but it is enough to give you radiation poisoning. And when you have radiation poisoning, you don't die instantly, but you do die within 1 to 2 weeks after the bomb has exploded. So the initial number of people that perished is somewhere on the par of 80,000. This is one of those things that if you get historians in the same room and you ask this question, they'll argue about how much the number is. Some say lower, some say higher, but 80,000 died instantly. And another 60,000 died from radiation poisoning afterwards. So that's right there is 140,000. But then they did another study that said another 62,000 people that were even further away had been exposed to so much radiation that they didn't get radiation poisoning, but they did get leukemia and blood diseases, and they died years after. So the total number at Hiroshima on the higher end is 200,000 if you include the people that also got blood disease and cancer, and that's 200,000 out of 350,000 residents. In Nagasaki, the number is usually hear is about 40,000 that died right away, and the total being closer to 74,000, although it's possible that it could be more than that as well. Mori-san became very interested in the numbers, and that's why I bring this up, because the official number for his school, the people that died around his school, was only 800 people. And he had been there. He was walking from the bridge to his school. He saw how many people had passed away, and it was a few thousand, not 800. So he knew the number was wrong, and he wanted to correct that. So he became a historian. Now, he was interviewing fellow survivors about what they witnessed that day, because all the papers, all the documents, all the photographs were burned away by the bomb. So he had to go to direct survivor testimonies and document it as a historian to get documentation about what happened. What did eyewitnesses actually say? Well, after correcting the number, which was much more than 800, he learned while he was actually interviewing witnesses that there had been American soldiers who had been in prison. They were prisoners of war. And so they passed away in the bomb. This is something, as an American, I never even heard of. And I later found out that the reason that we didn't find out about it is that the government didn't want us to know. You see, every side in a war has propaganda. It's a message that it puts out to the people to justify acts of war. And the propaganda in the United States at the time was that if we dropped this atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and there was actually another city that was planned, then it would save American lives. It was sold as no American lives would die if we dropped this bomb. Well, if 12 American service members had died by an American bomb, it kind of undermined that story. It's not something that they necessarily wanted to highlight. The problem with that is that here are these servicemen and their families don't know what happened to them. There was actually, before the atomic bomb happened, which happened on August 6th, 1945, there was another one in Nagasaki 3 days later on August 9th, 1945. 9 days before the Hiroshima bomb, there was actually an air raid by Americans on the city of Kure. Kure is west of Hiroshima, and they had munitions factories there where they would make weapons, they would make torpedoes and bullets and what have you. And there was also some major warships that were in Kure. So 9 days before we dropped the atomic bomb, the United States dropped the atomic bomb, there were many, many planes that came in and bombed the city of Kure to stop the ammunition and to stop the warships that had been anchored. They wanted to stop the warships because they were afraid of another attack like Pearl Harbor that happened on the island of Oahu earlier in the war. Well, during this exchange, this air raid, 22 of the US aircraft were shot down. Now, most of the crewmen died of these 22 shot down planes. However, there were some that actually parachuted out to be taken prisoner, and they were taken to the Chugoku military police headquarters. So here the military police brought them to the headquarters, they put them in prison, and this was in Hiroshima. 12 American prisoners of war in total were taken from this battle at Kure, and they were kept in Hiroshima. One ship in particular really stands out in this attack that happened at Kure. There was a B-25 bomber called the Lonesome Lady, and it was tasked with attacking the battleship Haruna, which was a Japanese battleship, and this ship was shot down. Now, the Lonesome Lady, it was a big bomber that had, there's a tradition in America where the name of the ship was painted on the side. And they had the name painted on the side, Lonesome Lady, and they even had a picture of a naked woman painted on the side of it. And this is what the servicemen did to entertain themselves during war. And so the Lonesome Lady, which is the nickname, dropped down and was shot down. And of the crew of 9, 8 of the POWs lived. And one of them had died. He jumped out with a parachute and the parachute didn't open, so he passed away. And 6 of the 8 who were in prison in Hiroshima at the time had perished. So half of those 12 servicemen that I've been talking about came from the Lonesome Lady. There's one serviceman in particular I just want to introduce now. I want you to remember his name. His name was Second Lieutenant James Ryan. And he was taken prisoner, and he was at the Chugoku military police headquarters, and he was a member of the Lonesome Lady. We're going to come back to him in just a few moments. So again, coming back to Mori-san, he knew that there were servicemen, the families were not given the information that they needed. I want you to just imagine for a moment that you have a father or a son or a husband that's in a war and they disappear and the government knows what happened to them, but because of the whole campaign for the war, they don't want to erode the image of the United States, so they don't tell these servicemen, these families of the servicemen, that they had died and how they had died. They're just prisoners of war that were missing in action, when in actuality they were KIA, killed in action. And normally what happens is whatever information is known, they knock on the door, they send it in a letter, and they let the families know for closure what had happened. But imagine they went away to war and you don't know what happened to them. And you ask and you ask and you ask and nobody tells you. Right? I'm not being critical of the American government here. It was during wartime, but I am being compassionate to these families of the servicemen who didn't know what happened. It leaves a big hole in your family. it leaves a big hole in your life. Now, I have worked with Jewish Holocaust survivors, and I feature their stories in a book that I wrote called Healing Our Bloodlines. And one of the things that happens is that some of the members of the family survive, and some of them disappear, and they don't know what happened. They don't know if they're in the concentration camps. They don't know if they're wandering around Europe still alive. It's a special kind of suffering to not know what happened to someone who probably passed away, because you can never fully have a funeral because you're still hoping they're still alive. And there were, of the 12 service family that Mori-san had found out about, only 3 of them had been notified of what had actually happened. The other 9 were completely kept in the dark. So there's 9 families that don't know what happened. They don't know that their family members perished in the atomic bomb that the United States had initiated to, as the United States was saying, to end the war, although there were much more factors involved in that than just an atomic bomb. So Mori-san felt that these families deserved to know what happened to them. He didn't look at them as just being American families. He didn't look at them as being foreigners. He didn't look at them as being enemies or former enemies. He looked at them as human beings that deserved to have closure so that they could have peace of mind of what happened to their family member. He valued Japanese lives and American lives equally. They were human lives. They were equal lives. So he set out on this whole journey to find the names of these 12 servicemen. And not only did he find the names, but he also went through considerable effort to notify the families of what had happened. He started, calling up the US government and the military and saying, look, the war is over, can you please share these documents? And he would get no response back, and they would tell him, stop calling. Well, it wasn't until 1973, there's this thing called the Freedom of Information Act that happened in the 1970s. And the way it works is you fill out a form, you send it to a government agency, and they have to supply anything that's declassified to that person who requested it. And Mori-san did that with the help of some people here. And so he got the information, he got the names, and you think that would have been the end of the journey, but it was just the beginning. He started calling internationally from Japan to the United States, talking with the operators and trying to find out where these men lived, because he didn't have that information. And it got to the point where he was running up phone bills around 70,000 yen, which is about $700 American back in the 1970s, which is probably closer to almost $2,000 a month here. And imagine the whole scenario. His wife is saying, please, I know what you're trying to do, but stop, it's too expensive. And he did this for 3 years. 3 years before he met his first family that actually was of the servicemen. 3 years before the first one. And he was so happy when that actually happened. It encouraged him to keep going. Well, to fast forward, it took several decades for him not only to get the list, but to also call the families and notify all of them of what had happened to their beloved, husband, uncle, brother, grandfather, what had happened to these men. And he wrote a book about it called Genbaku de Shinda Beisheishi, which means a secret history of US servicemen that were killed by the atomic bomb. Well, the reason that he was invited to that special gathering with President Obama and Premier Abe-san back in 2016, that moment when President Obama was hugging him and all the cameras started flashing, was because he had devoted so much of his life to make sure that the world knew what had happened to these 12 American men, and that their families could have the peace of mind of knowing that they had perished in the atomic bomb. One of the things that I really want to highlight about what impressed me about Mori-san is his incredible empathy, how much he cared for people. And I think, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to meet him and interview him for the documentary was to ask him, why did you cry? Like, what was it going on for you when President Obama hugged you? What happened for you? I think he just felt so honored. This is what he said. He felt so honored that he would be invited to this gathering. And his mind went blank when he was hugging Obama. And afterwards, he just realized that the reason he had been invited because he had spent so many years of his life to really see things on a human level. And when you're 8 years old and you see that many people that you know and love die right before you, you could be angry. You could be hateful. You could never want to talk to another American again, but that's not what Mori-san did. And it's in that spirit of equal lives that we need today, in today's strife, more than ever before. We need to see each other as equal, even if we're from a different country, even if we're a different color, even if we speak a different language, even if we were in a war together. He had every incentive to be angry and hateful, and he wasn't. He was empathic and forgiving. And that is one of the questions I asked him in the movie. You're going to have to see the movie to see what he said in response. Now, in the Hiroshima Memorial Peace Park, they have this thing called the Cenotaph. All right, it looks like a big arch. And in it is a stone case. And in that case, they inscribe the names of all the people who perished from the atomic bomb. Everyone. Nagasaki, Hiroshima. It doesn't matter what nationality you are. It doesn't matter the circumstances. If you died from the atomic bomb, your name is inscribed, you put a petition in, and they put your name inside that stone vault. Now, on the outside of the stone vault, there's a saying on it. And as the atomic bomb survivor, Koko Kondo-san, had told me, her translation of it was, "May all the souls rest in peace, for we shall never repeat this evil." And there are different translations of it because Japanese has certain qualities to it where you can interpret it in different ways. But that's her interpretation. And the sense of it was that we not need to ever use the atomic bomb again, and we honor these people, we remember these people who had to endure it. Right now, there are over 290,000 names of people who lost their lives to the bombs that are inside that cask at the Cenotaph. But when Mori-san had finally done all of these great things, I want you to remember back to Second Lieutenant James Ryan, who was part of the Lonesome Lady crew. There was never an American name at the time inside the Cenotaph. There have been people of Korean descent who lived in Hiroshima. There have been people who were Japanese, but never had an American name made it inside the cast, that vault of the Cenotaph, until Mori-san reached out to the family of Second Lieutenant James Ryan. Now, James Ryan was a prisoner of war. He was on the Lonesome Lady. He was in the Chogoku military headquarters. And right around the time that the bomb was exploding, he was actually going out with a guard to use the outdoor latrine And in that latrine, the structure, when the bomb went off, he was not in the building of the headquarters of the prison. So when the prison exploded and was damaged, he did not die initially. The blast came through. He was momentarily protected by the latrine structure that he was at. It was just happened to be perfect timing. So the day of August 6th, 1945, when the bomb happened, he survived. Unfortunately, he did get radiation poisoning and he did pass away less than a week later. However, his family was lucky enough that they got his service tag. His service tag was found by the latrine, which had been blown off his body because the explosion, the shock wave had been so strong. So the family was returned by the US government that service tag, which we call dog tags today. And the service tag was sent to the family, and the Ryan family was one of the lucky 3 families that actually was notified about what happened. But here's why Lieutenant James is so, Second Lieutenant James is so important. Mori-san called Francis Ryan, James Ryan's brother, and he explained what he was doing. He explained exactly, what he had done with the other families. And he also explained that we have this cenotaph. He said, there are no Americans in the cenotaph yet. Would you be willing to submit the application, and I'll help you do it, to petition to get his name inscribed inside that stone vault? And Francis Ryan said, absolutely. I want my brother's name in the cenotaph. I want to honor his memory in that way, as the first American to be placed inside the cenotaph. And so he sent him the form. Francis Ryan filled out the form, sent it back to Mori-san. And Mori-san, when he opened it up and he saw it, he cried. He cried because so much of the work that he had been doing was now symbolically being, acknowledged as the first time that this was ever going to happen, that an American and a Japanese person's name, side by side, who both perished in the same atomic bomb, was going to be laid to rest in the same cenotaph. And so James Ryan, Second Lieutenant James Ryan, an airman of the Lonesome Lady, was the first American name to be placed inside the Hiroshima Memorial Cenotaph. The Ryan family was so grateful for this gesture that Mori-san had done, and for all the hard work that he had done to value these American lives, that they actually gave the service tag, which was given to them by the US government, to Mori-san as a personal honoring. So I would like to say from my heart, Shigeaki Mori-san, arigatou gozaimashita. I am greatly appreciative to everything that you have done. Thank you for being in my movie Sakura Pearls. And the movie starts off with Mori-san telling the story about how the ashes from all the people that had perished around his school were put in the area next to his schoolyard. And they had taken trees from other parts of Japan called sakura trees and had planted them there, and how everything bloomed in a rebirth in his school. It was once a wasteland, and then it was a garden of sakura blooms. I just want to say thank you for inspiring me, and thank you for your contribution to my movie Sakura Pearls, Healing from World War II. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kamana Hunter, for sharing that wonderful story of connection and resilience with us today. You truly have an amazing talent in being able to nurture those relationships globally across generations, and to have a vision come to fruition with your documentary. I and some of our students here at the Matsunaga Institute were in the room back in 2019 at Pearl Harbor Visitor Center when you had the 2 Hiroshima Hibakusha and 2 Pearl Harbor survivors meet for part of the filming of Sakura Pearls, and it was by far one of the most humbling, inspiring experiences that I and our students will always treasure, and we still talk to about it till this day. You're definitely a change maker, and I wish you nothing but good wishes as you continue forward with your peace building initiatives. Thank you for not only spotlighting Mr. Mori-san's story, but also continuing to display resiliency during these unprecedented times. The story that provides breath of fresh air, hope, and vision to overcome challenges in our own lives as peace builders. Last but not least, thank you all for joining today's webinar. We deeply appreciate your interest in supporting joining us to learn about resiliency during unprecedented times through our beginning and end of the bomb talk stories.